Sir, your face has poverty written all over it, and you have the nerve to comment saying that black people didn't deserve the 40 acres? Get your out of here.
Hello guys, and welcome back to our channel. Now in today's video, I want us to tackle a disturbing comment by this palm color man that exposes the depth of articism and entitlement in America. Now, this palm color man had the audacity to say that black people don't deserve reparations despite the centuries-long legacy of slavery, segregation, and systemic oppression. Now, we're talking about the broken promise of 40 acres and a mule, a pledge made to freed slaves after the Civil War that was never fulfilled. Now, this unkept promise has had far-reaching consequences, perpetuating a significant wealth gap between black and palm color families that persists to this day. The truth is, black people built this country with their free labor, generating wealth and power for palm color elites. The United States became a superpower on the backs of enslaved Africans and their descendants, yet they've never received justice or compensation for their sacrifices. Now, in this video, we'll hear from my fellow black brothers and sisters and some palm color people who are speaking out against this injustice. We'll also explore the historical context of reparations, the ongoing impacts of systemic articism, and the urgent need for accountability and redress. So with that said, let's get into the videos. I will be right back.
40 acres and a mule remained unfulfilled, and many black families were left landless. Land equaled money. Land is what created this significant wage gap that still exists today. Black people built this country. Their free labor built this country. Our free labor made the United States a superpower. This is a fact, not an opinion, and we have never been paid for making this country a superpower. Get that through your head. That is what this is about. That is how ghettos were created. That is how our schools are still underfunded. That is how I can have the same job as a white person and still get paid less than them because of the promise of 40 acres and a mule never being fulfilled. And that is why black people deserve reparations, because none of you would be here without us.
Here's an interesting fact. In the fiscal year of 2025, the United States government is projected to spend $58.4 billion in international assistance programs. This includes humanitarian aid, military assistance, and economic development. This aid and assistance is actually provided by the United States Department of International Development. It gets a little deeper here. This is an independent agency of the United States government responsible for delivering civil developmental aid to foreign countries. Ironically, this agency was first established in 1961 by John F. Kennedy. The mission statement was allegedly to promote economic development in foreign countries, as well as to alleviate poverty globally. So we're talking about programs in place in other countries to address the issues of global health, disaster relief, social economic development, environmental protection, as well as education. They have missions in over 100 countries, okay? And not only that, it is one of the largest United States official aid agencies in the world. So you're telling me it's okay for homelessness to exist in America. So you're also saying it's okay for underdeveloped communities in America to get no assistance and financial aid. Under no circumstances do I think that's anywhere near humanitarian. Hold up. How you can spend $58 billion for global poverty, but yet you got people sleeping on the sidewalks in front of the White House? How can you spend $58 billion a year on global poverty when there is over 1 million homeless people here in America right now? You want to talk about economic development? Well, the only thing we've developed is a bipolar disorder trying to argue with people who are more interested in foreign relations than domestic relations. Now let's delve a little deeper. For the fiscal year of 2025, it is estimated that this department has $892 million allocated for various programs and initiatives, aimed at establishing global stability and prosperity. Interesting. Makes you wonder, man, if global prosperity is the initiative of this program and this agency, well, does that include the United States citizens? I mean, actually, we are part of the globe. Now, here's something even more radical. In the fiscal year of 2023, the United States government spent $60 million internationally sending around the planet. Roll down. So you telling me they done cut your EBT? People sleeping on the sidewalk everywhere. I mean, all over. Senior citizens, Medicaid, Medicare, all that get cut. Just for them to send all the way around the world so other people can have a good time. Now, we don't even want to talk about the 40 acres and the mule. Plus 30% interest rate. I mean, that's the same thing the banks charge. From 1865 till now. Let's do the math. I mean, assuming the value of 40 acres and a mule in 1865 was valued at around $400. Go red. Doing the math and calculating it all. But that 30% interest rate, man, the United States government owe every black person in America $761 quintillion. Straight up. Look.
Another controversial view. I don't want 40 acres and a mule. I want it all. I want us to have it all.
We are long overdue for reparations. Like, I truly believe that black people and people who have ancestry that was just like tied to like slavery and people who have been brought over here and systematically just done wrong over the years, I feel like the only way to make that right is to give us reparations, and not like a small amount of reparations. I feel like each black person is entitled to a large amount of money, and I feel like that large amount of money would give us the boost that we need as people. I feel like it would give us the boost that we need to like set up infrastructure. And I'm not saying everybody would use the reparations to do that, because I'm realistic. But at the same time, I feel like if they gave us reparations, we would have equal footing. It wouldn't be so hard for us. It would be, it would give us a little bit of leverage, and a lot of us, we wouldn't really know what to do with the money because we've never had money like that. But I do believe that we should be entitled to something, because we were unfairly brought to this country. Like, we were unfairly brought to this country, and we were forced to work within it. And when I say forced to work within it, we weren't just forced to build it. We were forced to deal with the laws that were strategically designed to work against us. And there were many times where people promised us things and literally with a piece of paper took it all back. Like, literally took it all back and put us in a worse position than we were before. And we were still forced to rebuild. We were forced to deal with the constant like sabotage from the government and just other powers that be that just found us to be the victims that they chose to victimize. And I honestly feel like the only way to rectify that is to give us our 40 acres and a mule. Like, I feel like that's the only way to make it right. And it's to the point where like the only real reason that I don't see us getting it is because America would have to admit its sins, and it doesn't want to admit that it did anything wrong when it comes to slavery. But at the same time, that is the only way to really rectify the racial divide in America, I see, and it is to make right on the wrong. The major wrong that like started this country off. And I feel like if we did that, then I don't know, we would be able to do more. We would have more of a footing. We wouldn't just have the same exits out of our positions, which would be like, playing football, getting some sort of scholarship, or rapping, or doing something, just using our art to get us out. Like, we would have other avenues. And I'm not saying like our art and our athletic gifts that we give to the world isn't something that we should like give. I'm saying that we should have other opportunities other than those opportunities that are there like that, if that makes any sense. And I don't know, just I woke up this morning and I feel like we are overdue reparations, like for real. Like, and I know a lot of white people gonna feel like that's a handout or something like that. But to be honest, this message wouldn't be for them anyway, because I don't expect you, a person that has had like, everything working for them and a lineage of everything working for them, and basically coming from everything that they built, or even just having the leverage of being able to exist peacefully, you know, and not even do anything, but just be able to exist peacefully. Like, I don't expect people coming from that to even understand what I'm saying, because you won't, you know, it's impossible to understand that if you ain't really been in it or actually looked at it or looked into it or tried to investigate that yourself. So this message wouldn't be for you, but for anybody else, you know, watching it and, you know, trying to understand it. I do believe that reparations would be the thing that really got us out of where we are. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it would get us out of a mindset that we have. It would get us out of, like, you know, the communities. It would be able to really revitalize our communities. But I don't think the powers that be will want to do that, because it's more profitable to keep people to where they are now. But just, you know, if we're speaking about truth and doing the right thing and really living the American way and achieving the American dream, this is something that America would have to do to, you know, set us on the right foot. So that's just my 2 cents at, you know, and what I was thinking about it. But yeah, reparations.
Crazy thing about the fact that white people don't want to learn about Black history is how much it would actually benefit them to understand Black history. Granted, that shouldn't be your motivation, but it would still benefit you. Take for example, the Tuskegee syphilis study, or the story of Henrietta Lacks. So the Tuskegee syphilis study, I always trip over those words, is in the 1930s, I believe in the 1930s, there were a group of 600 Black men. It actually ran from the 30s to, I want to say it was a 40-year period from the 30s to the 70s. There were a total of 600 Black men, poor Black men, mostly sharecroppers. Almost 4 of them had syphilis and 200 did not. Now, they were studied and they were given medical care, but when penicillin became the acceptable treatment for syphilis, that treatment was withheld from these men. The medical study was predatory. It did not give these men the accurate information or their families. And necessary medical treatment and necessary medical information was deliberately withheld from these participants. Tuskegee syphilis study is one of the reasons that we have informed consent in the medical industry. We need to understand that government agencies who oversee how businesses operate are considered waste, fraud, abuse because they do not bring in money. They're there to protect the general public from companies who are predatory and damage all of us. The story of Henrietta Lacks, whose cells we still use in medical research today. Now, they were taken without her consent when she went to Johns Hopkins for cervical cancer treatment. She was diagnosed there with cervical cancer. She went in for the treatment, and that was when Johns Hopkins found a malignant tumor. When the doctor collected her cells, he noticed that they were what we call immortal cells. So normal cells that would stop replicating, Henrietta Lacks cells continued to replicate and divide. And that cell line, which is called the HeLa cell line, is still used in medical research today. Henrietta Lacks was another one that those cells were taken without her consent. And although Johns Hopkins has acknowledged their wrongdoing and started working with the family to rectify that, it has become another reason that we have patient consent, and that private medical companies aren't just able to take your cells without your consent currently. Again, government agencies that cost money in order to oversee or police private entities to protect all of us. That is what private companies and wealthy businessmen consider waste, fraud, and abuse. Black history isn't just Black history. It's all of our history, and it's not there to make us feel comfortable. It's there to educate us and for us to learn from.
I just want to take 2 seconds to say, people, we need to educate our own children because schools aren't doing it. Okay, my kids are 14 and 16, and I thought that when Kendrick said 40 acres and a mule, this is bigger than the music, they would know what that meant. They didn't know. I was mortified. So I taught them, I said, listen, 40 acres and a mule is about how when slavery finally ended, they had promised the people that had been enslaved 40 acres and a mule to start off their lives. You know, kind of like a reparation kind of thing. And they did not fulfill that promise. And that is why in 2025, you still hear people calling for reparations. So since it's Black History Month, I thought it was a good time for me to make sure my kids knew that. And I think you need to do the same. Because these people that are out there saying that that was a trash performance and it was boring and it was the worst, halftime show ever, They either are uneducated and didn't know, or they just didn't like the message. And we're not going to be those people.
Now, we all have seen how America's history is marred by a pattern of broken promises to Black people. From the unfulfilled vow of 40 acres and a mule to the hollow declarations of equality for all, and we value Black lives. It's a cycle of deceit and betrayal that has repeated itself for centuries. Now, the promise of 40 acres and a mule was a crucial one. Made to newly freed slaves after the Civil War, it was a chance for Black people to build a future, to own land, and to create wealth, but it was short-lived. President Andrew Johnson, a staunch supporter of palm color supremacy, overturned the order, leaving Black people landless and forced into sharecropping, a system that was barely better than slavery. Now, this broken promise set the tone for the centuries that followed. Black people were promised equality, but it was a promise that was never kept. Instead, they faced systemic racism, segregation, and violence. Still do, actually. The Homestead Act, which allowed palm color families to build generational wealth, was denied to Black people who were instead forced to trade their rightful inheritance for 40 hours of labor a week. Now, today we are still grappling with the consequences of these broken promises. The wealth gap between Black and palm color families is staggering, with the average net worth of a Black family being only 1/10 that of a palm color family. The legacy of slavery, Jim Crow laws, and systemic racism continues to haunt Black people. And now we're seeing such comments from palm color people, and this palm color man's comment is because of Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance, which included a powerful reference to 40 acres and a mule, a phrase deeply rooted in the history of post-Civil War America. Now, during his performance, Lamar declared, 40 acres and a mule, this is bigger than the music. They tried to rig the game, but you can't fake influence. This reference goes beyond the music. It draws attention to a historical injustice that still impacts racial and economic disparities today. After the Civil War, formerly enslaved Black people were promised 40 acres and a mule as a form of reparations. Now, this promise was part of Special Field Order Number 15, issued by Union General William Sherman in 1865, which aimed to redistribute Confederate land to Black people. However, after President Abraham Lincoln's assassination, his successor Andrew Johnson overturned the policy and returned the land to its former Confederate owners. Now, this broken promise not only shattered hopes, but also contributed to systemic racial and economic inequalities. The legacy of this failed promise is significant, with historian Henry Louis Gates Jr. calling it astonishingly radical for its time. Now, he described it as the first major attempt at reparations for formerly enslaved people. The policy's failure left many Black communities devastated, with lasting effects on wealth, land, ownership, and opportunities that continue to affect Black Americans today. Now, Lamar's reference to 40 acres and a mule is more than a lyric. It serves as a reminder of this unfulfilled promise and the continued struggle for justice. By invoking this phrase, Lamar urges people to reckon with the ongoing legacy of broken promises and inequalities, sparking a much-needed conversation about reparations and racial justice in America. Now, we all know how the 40-acre promise ended, right? Just as the freed people began to harvest their first season's crops on their new land, it was wrested away from them by returning Confederate soldiers. Now, this was America's first broken promise to the freed people. Later, the federal government again denied wealth creation opportunities to Black Americans through the New Deal and the GI Bill, which granted palm color Americans, but not their Black counterparts, access to the American dream through home ownership opportunities and incentives. Now, if you ever wondered why there are no Black or brown people living in your suburban neighborhood, the answer, as we will explain, probably lies in the GI Bill. Now, these lost opportunities to create an inheritance laid the foundation of the racial wealth gap, which currently results in palm color American families having 8 to 10 times greater wealth than Black American families. We view the racial wealth gap as a measure of the damages for centuries of slavery, segregation, and discrimination America has inflicted on African Americans. Now, the promise was the first systematic attempt to provide a form of reparations to newly freed slaves, and it was astonishingly radical for its time proto-socialist in its implications. In fact, such a policy would be radical in any country today. The federal government's massive confiscation of private property, some 400,000 acres, formerly owned by Confederate landowners, and its methodical distribution to former black slaves. Now, it's difficult to stress adequately how revolutionary this idea was. As the historian Eric Foner puts it in his book, Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution 1863 to 1877. Here in coastal South Carolina and Georgia, the prospect beckoned of a transformation of Southern society more radical even than the end of slavery. Try to imagine how profoundly different the history of race relations in the United States would have been had this policy been implemented and enforced. Had the former slaves actually had access to the ownership of land, of property, if they had had a chance to be self-sufficient economically, to build, accrue, and pass on wealth. After all, one of the principal promises of America was the possibility of average people being able to own land and all that such ownership entailed. As we know all too well, this promise was not to be realized for the overwhelming majority of the nation's former slaves, who numbered about 3.9 million. Now, going back to the comment made by this palm color man, which is not only disturbing, but it's also a perfect example of the flawed and entitled mentality that has been perpetuated for centuries. Now, when he says that black people don't deserve reparations just because a rapper says so, he's completely missing the point. Reparations are not about what a rapper or any individual says. They're about acknowledging and making amends for the centuries-long legacy of slavery, segregation, and systemic oppression that has been inflicted upon black people. His comment also reeks of ignorance and a lack of understanding of the historical context of reparations. The promise of 40 acres and a mule was made to freed slaves after the Civil War, and it was a promise that was never fulfilled. This broken promise has had far-reaching consequences, perpetuating a significant wealth gap between black and palm color families that persists to this day. His comment also implies that black people are somehow undeserving of reparations, that they are not worthy of compensation for the injustices that have been inflicted upon them. And this mentality is rooted in palm color supremacy and a deep-seated belief in black inferiority. His comment is also a classic example of gaslighting, where he's attempting to shift the narrative and make black people feel like they're the ones who are wrong, that they are the ones who are making unreasonable demands. But the truth is, reparations are not a handout. They're a matter of justice. They are about acknowledging the harm that has been done and taking concrete steps to repair it. And until we can have an honest conversation about this, and until they can acknowledge the flaws in their own mentality and the harm that this has inflicted upon black people, we'll never be able to move forward. We have finally come to the end of the video, but what do you our viewers have to say? Share your thoughts as well in the comment section. Thank you for watching and see you in our next video.